The wind tore across the desert like it had a grudge, dragging waves of dust and sand across the plains. Thunder cracked in the distance, deep and hungry, rumbling over the jagged silhouettes of the canyons that loomed beyond the town of Perdition Gulch. Lightning split the black sky above a cracked dirt trail, revealing a lone figure limping through the storm, one hand gripping the strap of a battered army duffel slung over his back. He wore an old cavalry coat, the blue bleached into gray, the brass buttons dulled and mismatched. His boots were scuffed down to the nails, and his beard, matted with dust and sweat, clung to a jaw that hadn't spoken in hours. He moved like a man used to silence, like someone who'd walked away from the world and had no intention of returning. He reached the edge of the town just as the rain began to fall, first in slaps, then in hammer blows. The buildings of Perdition Gulch leaned and sagged, hollowed out like bones stripped of meat. Most were boarded shut or half-collapsed, the windows blank-eyed and cold. But one place, half a block south of the old general store, still had a faint flicker of lantern light in the window. A worn sign hung askew over the porch, Gibson Schoolhouse. He stepped onto the creaking boards of the porch and knocked, once, then twice more. A long pause followed. Then the sound of footsteps. A voice, firm, female, called from inside. "You sick?" "Bit." "No." "You got a name?" "Eli." Another silence. Then the door eased open just enough for the barrel of a shotgun to appear, leveled with calm purpose at his chest. Behind it stood a woman with streaks of silver in her dark braid, and eyes sharp enough to skin a lie. She stared him down without blinking. "You military?" "Was." "Which side?" "The side that lost interest." She squinted at him. Her hands didn't waver, but something in the set of his shoulders, or maybe the way the storm howled behind him, made her ease the door wider. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of beans, wood smoke, and something faintly floral. The room had once held desks, but now it was lined with cots and trunks, quilts piled high. A wood stove crackled near the far wall. Two other women sat near it. One was younger, perhaps mid-20s, with big wary eyes and a handkerchief tied over her curls. The other, older, wore a worn red shawl and smoked a cigarette from a long holder, her painted lips pursed with caution. "He just needs a dry place," the younger woman murmured. "Don't we all?" The one in red replied, not looking at him. Ruthie, the woman with the shotgun, motioned to the corner near the stove. "You can sleep there. Floor only. No wandering after dark. And if your hands go anywhere they ain't meant to, we'll bury what's left before the sun comes up." Eli gave a single nod and lowered himself onto the quilt-strewn floor. He set his duffel down with a soft thud and removed his coat, steam rising from the soaked fabric. His eyes drifted over the room, not hungry, not curious, just watchful. Dinner was shared in silence. The women didn't ask where he came from or why he was walking the desert alone, and Eli didn't offer. Only the occasional crackle from the stove and the distant growl of thunder filled the room. Later, as the rain battered the roof, Ruthie extinguished the lanterns one by one. The windows were shuttered, the door latched tight with a heavy iron bolt. Eli lay back on the quilt, one arm behind his head, eyes fixed on the ceiling. In the dark, quiet voices stirred. "You sure about him?" Lenora whispered. "He's got soldier's hands," Ruthie said. "But I don't trust that duffel." "He doesn't look like one of them," June added from her cot, exhaling smoke into the blackness. "But I've seen good men hide worse." Ruthie's voice dropped. "No man wanders into perdition this close to blood season unless he's hiding something, or unless he was sent." The room fell quiet. Hours passed. The storm lessened, rain softening to a whisper. Eli remained still, but his ears caught every shift of fabric, every breath. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, the cold click of a revolver's cylinder being eased into place. He didn't move, just open his eyes. Ruthie stood by the window now, half hidden in the shadows, cradling a pistol, her gaze fixed beyond the shutters, as if watching for ghosts. June sat upright on her cot, one hand resting on a knife she'd drawn from beneath her pillow. Eli rose to one elbow. His voice, when it came, was calm. "If I meant harm, I'd have shown it." Ruthie looked down at him. "And if we weren't who we are, we'd be dead already. He sat up slowly, revealing nothing but quiet certainty. You expecting someone worse than me? We're always expecting worse. From her bed, Lenora spoke softly, her voice trembling. You ever heard of the Red Hand Circle? Eli's eyes didn't change, but something in his posture did, a subtle tightening, like a knot being drawn. I have. They took this town, Ruthie said. Twice. First time was bad. Second time, they didn't even take anything. Just left warnings. Symbols. Left a girl hanging from the bell tower, cut her ears off first. June's voice was a low hum now, bitter and familiar. We stayed because someone had to. Because no one else would. Eli looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. You expecting them back? Ruthie's silence was answer enough. Eli stood and walked to the stove, lifting his duffel. The women tensed. He unzipped it slowly and pulled out a folded oilcloth. When he unwrapped it, the firelight caught the gleam of steel, a cavalry saber, short and worn, but clean. Below it, a Colt Dragoon revolver with initials carved faintly in the grip. He set both on the table without a word. Then he sat down again. The women stared. Ruthie stepped forward, her gaze locked on the saber. That's Union issue. Was mine, Eli said. You still a soldier? No, he said. But I remember how. Outside, the wind moaned through the broken ribs of the town. Something in the night shifted, an omen, maybe. The women didn't speak for a long while. The storm outside had passed, but inside the schoolhouse, something far older had begun to stir. Trust was not given, but the kind of silence that followed held something close to it. By morning, the ground outside would carry new tracks. But for now, in this moment, they were four strangers, haunted, hunted, and not yet broken, gathered around a fading fire, listening for footsteps in the dark. Morning came slow to Perdition Gulch. A gray, dust-hung light filtered through the shutters, painting long, tired stripes across the floor of the old schoolhouse. Rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the air still held its weight, thick with the smell of scorched sagebrush and old iron. Eli sat at the table, hunched over a chipped tin mug, the steam rising to his face, but his eyes far away. Across from him, Ruthie ladled beans into bowls with quiet authority, her movements clean, practiced, suspicious. Lenora offered him a square of cornbread with a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, while Miss June sat smoking at the far end of the room, her feet tucked beneath her, watching like a crow perched on a rooftop. No one spoke for a long while. Where'd you serve? Ruthie asked, not looking at him. Eli swallowed a mouthful, wiped the edge of the bowl with the bread. Everywhere that burned. That don't narrow it much. He didn't answer. Don't suppose you'd mind telling us how you come to be walking through Red Hand country this time of year? Stillness met her question. Lenora stirred uneasily, but Eli didn't flinch. Instead, he looked toward the front window, where the wind had begun to stir the porch dust again. I needed to be nowhere, he said at last, so I walked toward it. Ruthie set the ladle down with a thud, and the metal clinked against the pot. You talk like a man who's seen ghosts. I don't talk like anything unless I have to. Then maybe now's the time. He looked at her then, really looked, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart give a quiet, unwelcome lurch. He'd seen more than ghosts. They came in the spring, Ruthie said, voice lower now, not for him, but for herself. Rode in on the heels of a blue norther. 8 of them, faces covered in red cloth, boots still wet with river mud. My husband went to talk. Thought they were passing through. She sat across from him, folding her hands. Her eyes didn't blink. He never made it back to the porch. They cut him down right in front of me, left his face in the dirt, and made us watch while they burned the barn and pulled my little brother out by his ears. She wasn't crying. Not Ruthie. Her voice stayed calm, like she was reciting a weather report. That was the most frightening part of all. They told us Perdition was just a place on the map to them, a stop between bigger fires. But they'd be back. Said they liked how it looked in flamelight. Told me to wait here. Said the devil sends reminders. Eli stared into the steam of his mug, silent. We stayed, Lenora said quietly, sitting beside Ruthie. Because we couldn't run anymore. Not all the way. You run far enough, and the world folds back on you. June tapped her cigarette ash into a jar. We turned this place into a kind of home. A place for women like us. The ones no town would take. The ones the fire didn't kill. Eli looked between them. You turned it into a fortress. No, Ruthie said. We turned it into bait. A silence fell again, but this time it was broken by a sound none of them wanted to hear. The distant, hollow clatter of hooves on hard-packed earth. They all stood, every one of them, without thinking. The front door swung open. Wind rushed in, hot and mean. A horse stood alone at the edge of the road, ribs heaving, saddle torn and soaked with something dark. A saddlebag swung from one side, split open, flapping in the wind, and across the animal's flank, smeared in something vile and red, was a crude print of a hand. Ruthie's voice cracked like a twig. They're coming back. Maybe tonight. No one moved. Lenora closed the door with shaking fingers. Could be a trick. Could be meant to scare. It worked, June muttered. Ruthie turned toward Eli, shotgun now resting in the crook of her elbow. Her gaze was sharp and cold. You still say you're just passing through. I still am. But you knew that mark. I did. How? I seen it in Nevada, he said. On a post outside Stillwater. On a preacher's coat nailed to a barn door. On the face of a dead sheriff they dragged behind a wagon for 3 miles. His voice had a new weight now, not louder, just heavier, like a storm rolling in behind his ribs. He stood, slow and deliberate, walked to the window, and scanned the horizon like he was counting ghosts. I tracked them once, he said. Years ago. Got close enough to smell what they leave behind. Then you're one of them, June said, standing now too. No, Eli replied, and there was steel in his tone. But I knew the kind of men who ride with the red hand. I saw what they did at Juniper Crossing. I buried a boy they used for firewood. Lenora looked from one face to the other, something desperate blooming in her eyes. He's not lying. You can tell when someone's scared of their own memories. Ruthie didn't lower the gun. You could be one of theirs. A scout. They send men ahead all the time. Quiet men. Broken men. If I was a scout, I wouldn't be standing in your kitchen eating beans. You'd already be ash. His words were blunt, but they hit true. Ruthie hesitated. I can help, he said. But only if you let me. Ruthie looked him over one last time. Then she nodded, slow and reluctant, as if making a deal with something she didn't entirely believe in. Fine. You stay. But you don't sleep again until this place is ready. I won't, he said. They began to work. Eli moved with methodical precision, unpacking a length of coiled wire from his duffel, small iron spikes, rusted nails, glass shards. He laid them out like relics, not weapons, and placed them with the same reverence a priest might offer communion. He rigged the windows with broken bells and oil cans, laid a perimeter of tripwire connected to slats of wood covered in horseshoe nails. He showed them how to build false shadows near the doorway and how to reinforce the floorboards to funnel boots toward kill zones. He spoke little, but his hands told stories. He moved like someone trained, not just by violence, but by necessity. Lenora watched him set a trap near the front porch and said, You've done this before. Yes. For what army? No army. Just the dead. June, high in the rafters with a rifle, whispered to Ruthie, Where does a man like that come from? Ruthie didn't answer. She just watched him place a bent piece of metal beneath the sill and wedge it tight, then look back with those eyes that had seen too much and were still willing to see more. Who are you? She asked finally. Eli looked at her for a long time, then walked back to the table where his saber and revolver still lay. He picked up the blade, turned it in his hands. I'm the man who came looking for silence, he said, and found your war instead. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the rocks, turning the sky the color of dying coals. Inside, for people prepared for a reckoning. None of them spoke it, but all of them knew. By morning, the ghosts would not be the only ones in the dust. The wind carried them in. At first, it was just the dust, long, curling fingers of it stretching over the dry plain like smoke from some unseen fire. Then came the sound. Hooves. 5 riders. Slow at first, then surging, like the pulse of something too big to outrun. Ruthie stood at the front window, jaw set, the same way she'd stood the day they killed her husband. The shotgun rested in her arms, like it belonged there. Her eyes, sharp as canyon glass, didn't blink once as the dust drew closer. Behind her, June was already climbing the ladder to the roof, her rifle slung over her back, and a flask tucked into her blouse, like a secret promise. Lenora crouched low by the front door, pale and breathing hard, holding the pistol Eli had given her. Inside the room, Eli moved with eerie calm. The windows were sealed tight behind boards, but he knew where each crack would give him a sight line. He'd laid traps all morning, tripwires tied to cans, bottles filled with oil, steel caltrops buried in dust outside the porch. The kind of things meant to slow a man, not kill him. Killing would come later. Then came the laughter. A sharp, wild sound broke through the wind, too loud, too sure of itself. From the saddle of a black mare at the head of the pack, a man with long red gloves and a crow-feather hat rode forward and pulled up, just 20 yards from the schoolhouse steps. His voice boomed, rough with whiskey and cruelty. "Well, look what we got here." The little fort of horrors still standing. Ruthie didn't flinch. She stepped out onto the porch, shotgun in hand, every inch of her daring the desert to spit on her again. The man on the horse removed his hat and gave her a mock bow. "Cass McKinnon," she called, her voice like gravel soaked in iron. "Didn't think you had the stones to show your face again." "Oh, Ruthie," he chuckled. "You always did talk like you had a pair yourself." Behind him, the other 4 outlaws laughed. 2 wore masks. One had a half-burned face and spit into the dirt every few seconds. The last one had a necklace of human teeth. All of them leaned in their saddles with the swagger of men who'd never heard no and meant it. Inside, Eli crouched near the window. He didn't speak, didn't look away. His fingers brushed the hilt of his saber, then moved to the hammer on the dragoon revolver resting near the door. Cass shouted again. "This your new husband, Ruthie? Got him hid inside with the kitchen knives?" "He's not here for me," she said. "He's here for you." Cass's grin twitched, just a little. "Light it," he barked to the man with the burn scars. The outlaw dismounted and pulled a bottle from his saddlebag, rag already stuffed in the neck. He struck a match on his belt, and in one breath, flame erupted. But as he turned to hurl it, the wind, sharp and sudden, swung from the east. The bottle arced too high, too wide, and exploded uselessly against the side wall, flames licking up but finding only wet sand and thick clay soaked into the wood. The outlaws cursed. Eli, from inside, pulled a length of rope and yanked it hard. A metal can full of nails and powder dropped from the ceiling beam, slamming into the porch in front of the door. The blast wasn't large, but it was loud. Enough to scatter the horses, enough to drive the men back. Gunfire followed. 2 shots from June's repeater rang out from above, sharp and sure. One outlaw tumbled from his horse, clutching his side. Another dove behind the trough, swearing. Lenora screamed as glass shattered behind her. One of the boards ripped loose by a slug, and her shoulder jerked back, red blooming through her blouse. But she didn't drop the pistol. She gritted her teeth and slid across the floor, pushing her back to the wall, covering the door. Eli moved like lightning. A shape crashed through the window. One of the outlaws, eyes wild, a hunting knife clutched in his hand. He landed hard but rose fast, swinging. Eli was faster. He grabbed the saber from the wall and met the man in a blur of silver and grit. The blade caught the outlaw just beneath the collarbone, deep enough to send him screaming. Then Eli pivoted, shoved the man backward into a tripwire. The outlaw went down, hard, a tangle of limbs and curses. Eli stood over him, breathing slow, saber dripping, eyes hard. "You fight like a ghost," the man wheezed. And then a voice from outside called in. "Holy hell!" came a rasp. "That's him. That's Major Elias Ward." Everything stilled. Cass McKinnon's face twisted. "No," he growled. "That bastard's dead. He died at Harmon, burned with the rest of them." Eli stepped out onto the porch, saber still in hand, blood smearing the blade. He looked down at Cass with the patience of stone, as if he'd waited years for this exact moment. "I ain't a ghost," he said, "but I owe the dead." June watched from the rooftop, stunned. Lenora, shaking, turned her head toward Ruthie. Ruthie just stared, the shotgun slackening in her grip. She remembered the stories. The rogue cavalry commander who went off books, hunting down outlaws the army refused to touch. The man who turned Fort Harmon into a sanctuary for refugees and was betrayed from within. The whole outpost slaughtered. They said he'd burned in the raid. But there he stood, alive, coated in blood and sand, wielding a saber like he'd never stopped. Her voice cracked with memory. "You saved my husband's caravan," she whispered. 8 years ago. Canyon of the Cross. You were the one who got them out when the gang trapped them by the ridge." Eli's gaze shifted toward her, just a flicker, but in that glance was recognition. Of what she'd lost. Of what he had, too. Cass cursed and raised his rifle. Eli raised his pistol faster. The shot rang out like thunder. Cass McKinnon fell from the saddle, clutching his shoulder, screaming curses as he hit the dirt. The remaining outlaws scattered. One grabbed Cass and hauled him across a horse. They rode hard, back into the dust, leaving blood and fury behind them. When silence finally returned, it came like something sacred. Ruthie stepped down from the porch and walked to Eli. "You never told us who you were." "I didn't think it mattered." June climbed down from the roof, rifle slung low. "Well, it matters now." Lenora leaned against the doorframe, bleeding but alive. "We should tell people. Let them know you're back." Eli sheathed the saber. "I'm not back," he said. "Just passing through." But his eyes lingered on the faces before him. 3 women who had fought, bled, and stood their ground like soldiers. And for a moment, he felt something dangerous tug at his heart. A reason to stay. He turned toward the dying light on the horizon, watching the red sky bleed over the hills. Behind him, the women gathered in silence. The siege lifted, but the war far from over. The fire still smoldered in the trough where Cass McKinnon's bottle had landed, licking weakly at the scorched timber. Night had passed in fits and bursts, like a fever breaking, and now, as the first pale stretch of dawn bled over the desert, only 2 of the red hand circle remained alive. Cass was one of them. His face was red with blood and rage, twisted with pain as he gripped his wounded shoulder. The other outlaw, a thin, sunburnt man with trembling hands, had tried to ride, but his horse had bolted, spooked by the smell of powder and the howl of death in the air. Cass made a break for it. He leapt onto his mount with a cry of pain and desperation, spurred it hard, and the beast tore away from the compound in a wild arc. But the dust hadn't even settled before Ruthie raised her shotgun, calm and unshaking, and pulled the trigger. The blast cracked like dry timber. The horse screamed once, its front legs buckling under it as it crashed to the ground, dragging Cass down with it in a storm of hooves and sand. He lay in the dirt, gasping, trying to crawl, one arm dragging uselessly behind him. His red gloves were soaked through now, sticky with blood, his hat lost somewhere in the chaos. Eli walked out slow, each footstep deliberate, kicking up dust that shimmered in the soft light. He stopped a few paces from the broken man, saber at his side, revolver holstered, no weapon in hand. Cass looked up, grinning through cracked teeth. "Took your sweet damn time, Ward." Eli didn't smile. "You remember Harmon?" Cass spat. "Wasn't personal. We were paid. You nailed children to walls. They screamed just like soldiers." The words hung between them like rot. Ruthie approached, silent as the grave, shotgun still in her arms. She looked at Cass with eyes that no longer saw a man, only a wound that had to be closed. "Let us have him," she said. Eli didn't look at her, but stepped back all the same. June came next, bruised and dust-covered, her shawl stained with ash and sweat. Lenora followed behind, clutching her bandaged shoulder, pale but steady. The 3 women surrounded Cass, not with fury, but with purpose, with justice. Cass laughed again, weak, breathless. "You're going to kill me with words, huh?" "No," Ruthie said. "We're going to judge you." He blinked, confused, and tried to sit upright. A boot pinned him back down. The sun climbed higher as the trial began. They didn't speak in turns or raise their voices. They spoke like women laying wreaths on graves. Ruthie told of the barn fire, of her husband's eyes when he died, still locked on her face. June recounted the burning of the saloon in dry water, how they made her sing while they poured kerosene over her piano. Lenora, soft and trembling, spoke of the baby sister she found beneath the porch, broken, blue, cold. Cass listened, and for the first time since perdition had known his name, he said nothing. When it was done, they didn't ask for consensus. No vote, no argument. Ruthie knelt beside him, pulled the red gloves from his hands, and threw them into the fire. Then she tied his wrists with rope and stood up. "You ride through the world breaking it open," she said. "Now it's your turn to see what it gives back." They dragged him to the far ridge outside town, where the cacti grew tall, and dry bones littered the sand. They left him there, bound, without water, without a horse, without a name that could protect him. Just the rising sun and the long walk between breath and death. Eli never spoke a word. When they returned, the town was quiet again. The bodies had been burned. The traps reset. Silence settled over Perdition Gulch like a quilt of dust and solemn promise. Ruthie sat on the porch, a bottle in her hand, watching the way the sunlight stretched across the dry earth, like paint on cracked canvas. She didn't turn when Eli stepped up beside her. "You stayed longer than you meant to," she said. "I owed you that." "You don't owe me anything," she said. Then, after a pause, "There's a chair here, if you want it. Ain't much. A roof. Some company that won't shoot you unless you deserve it." Eli looked past her, across the plain, toward the canyon mouth, where the wind was just beginning to sing again. "There's others out there," he said softly. "Still burning towns. Still waiting for ghosts." Ruthie didn't argue. She didn't try to stop him. "You ever find yourself tired?" she said. "Perdition'll still be here. We might even have coffee." He gave her a half-smile, small and cracked, but real. Then he stepped down from the porch, hoisted the old army duffel over his shoulder, and walked into the new morning. His figure grew smaller with every step, fading into the same horizon he'd come from. The wind tugged at his coat, and the dust swallowed his boots, but he didn't look back. Not once. Lenora stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She watched until the heat shimmer made him vanish completely. Her voice was a whisper, barely more than a breath. "Maybe he just wanted a place to sleep," she said. "But we needed him more than he ever needed us." Ruthie leaned back in her chair, eyes closed now, head tilted toward the sky. And behind them, Perdition Gulch stood quiet, but not unguarded. Not anymore.